You think medieval folks were uptight prudes who made love through a hole in a sheet. Think again. In those times, you could wake up to a court order demanding an intimate medical inspection with certified examiners assessing whether your body was fit for marriage. Medieval sexuality wasn't something discreet. It was a performance, a public drama. Bishops ran massive entertainment networks. Newlyweds, they needed witnesses to confirm the consummation. One failed test and your entire future could fall apart. This is the disturbing reality of medieval sexuality, a world that makes today's dating apps feel like Sunday Mass. Between 1100 and 500 CE, the records reveal a parade of public rituals and invasive practices so bizarre they make modern reality TV look like a nature documentary. What follows isn't in your school textbooks. Is the raw, unfiltered truth about how our ancestors dragged the most private moments into the most public spaces. We're about to explore 7 layers of medieval madness. First, the chilling fitness trials where your bedroom abilities were turned into legal evidence. Then, the ceremonial requirement that consuming a marriage meant having an audience. We'll uncover how bishops profited from entertainment empires even as they preached virtue. You'll see how medieval doctors prescribed sexual activity like medicine. We'll explore health treatments more dangerous than the problems they were meant to solve. Then come the strange love potions brewed with disturbing ingredients. And finally, public punishments for adultery that turn shame into street theatre. Every part of this journey will make you more thankful for modern privacy than ever before. Let's begin with one of the most humiliating court procedures in human history, the fitness trials, where your physical capability for marriage became part of the official record. Picture York, England, in the year 1370. John Sanderson stands inside a courtroom. Several certified experts arrive to examine him. A court scribe notes down their findings in clinical detail. That's not fiction. It's straight from real legal documents. And no, this wasn't a strange exception. It was standard legal process in much of medieval Europe. If your spouse claimed you couldn't perform your marital duties, you'd be brought to court and subjected to a public medical evaluation. Failing it could mean annulment, loss of your dowry, and complete social disgrace. These trials were held in specially designated rooms within cuirasses across Europe. Imagine a cold stone chamber with tall windows, wooden benches for observers, and a raised platform for the accused. Certified inspectors, typically seasoned doctors or midwives appointed by the court, wore official insignia. The procedure was clinical and horrifying. First, a preliminary visual assessment while officials looked on. Then came the formal evaluation, extensive, slow, and detailed. The examination could take hours. Officials recorded everything: your physical state, your responsiveness to stimulation, your overall fitness for marriage. Medical professionals searched for signs of dysfunction or incapacity, and all of it happened in full view of judges, lawyers, and sometimes relatives. John Sanderson's court file described his condition in blunt medical terms, suggesting a serious physical issue. His wife had launched the trial after 3 years of an unconsummated marriage, claiming financial damages. In 1292, Walter Deontay went through something even worse. His wife insisted on 3 separate examinations across a month, each one more invasive than the last. He failed all 3 despite using medicinal treatments to help. But the most haunting story might be from Paris, 1450. Pierre de Framville only passed his trial on the 3rd try, and only after taking dangerous herbal concoctions that risked permanent damage. That's how high the pressure was. Men would risk poisoning themselves rather than face the shame of failure. These trials weren't just physically excruciating, they were psychologically brutal. Each failed attempt wrecked your reputation further. Technically, retries were allowed, but everyone carried more humiliation. And the courtroom wasn't just full of strangers. It could include your in-laws, medical experts, notaries, and even church officials. The examiners used established methods. Some involved stimulation techniques, others employed temperature changes or crude medical tools we'd now call instruments. Now, imagine the mental toll. You're half-dressed in a courtroom, trying to prove your body works, surrounded by observers recording every reaction. Some men fainted, others broke down crying. The humiliation is forever etched in official court records. And here's the deeper truth. Marriage in medieval Europe was primarily a legal and economic agreement. Consummation wasn't optional. It was what sealed the contract. The church taught that producing children was the core purpose of marriage. No consummation meant no valid union. Canon law, drawn from Roman legal tradition, allowed annulment for permanent incapacity. And medieval medicine viewed sexual dysfunction as either a physical illness needing treatment or a spiritual affliction requiring prayer. Physicians operated under humoral theory, believing bodily imbalances could cause dysfunction. Surprisingly to some, women had legal rights to marital satisfaction. Both partners were expected to respond when the other requested it. Failure to perform was considered a breach of legal responsibility. The numbers speak volumes. Court records suggest more than 200 such fitness trials occurred per decade in major cities like London, Florence, and Paris. Fewer than 1 in 3 ended with the marriage intact. The consequences reached far beyond the bedroom. Family alliances collapsed, dowries were forfeited. Entire social and financial networks could unravel based on what happened in that cold, echoing courtroom. Today, we assume medical privacy as a basic right. Your intimate life is between you, your partner, and maybe your physician. No one's dragging you into court for physical evaluation. There's no inspection team manually testing you while clerks jot down notes. The tools, medications, and treatments available now would have appeared like pure sorcery to medieval people forced into these orals. We forget that the idea of intimate privacy is actually a modern concept. But here's the truly unsettling part. Fitness trials were at the very least for married people caught in a legal conflict. Now, picture this. Your wedding night itself being a public event that required witnesses to confirm that you succeeded. Think fitness trials were invasive. Wait until you hear about ceremonial consummation, where completing the marriage required an audience of high-status onlookers. In 1445, Margaret of Anjou married King Henry V, VI of England. She was just 15. On their first night together, 23 individuals, including clergy, nobles, and court officials, gathered inside the royal bedchamber. They weren't lingering in the hallway. They were in the room surrounding the curtain bed, straining to hear sounds or spot movement that would signal successful consummation. At the foot of the bed stood the Archbishop of Canterbury, offering blessings as the young couple tried to perform their duties. Without this observed act, the union that tied England and France together could be considered invalid. Imagine your priest, your boss, and your family all present for the most nerve-wracking night of your life. That was the reality of royal marriages in the medieval era. The preparation for these nights was a twisted mix of ritual and humiliation masked as festivity. It began with the undressing ceremony. The bride and groom were stripped not by each other, but by relatives, while guests sang ribald songs and made vulgar jokes. Every layer removed brought loud cheers and inappropriate commentary. The bride's mother and aunts undressed her loudly, discussing her fertility and readiness for childbirth. Meanwhile, the groom's male relatives helped remove his clothes, tossing crude remarks about performance expectations and offering last-minute advice. Then came the procession to the bedchamber. The couple would walk, often blushing and nervous, through crowded halls filled with intoxicated guests. They'd be pelted with symbolic items meant to bless fertility. Or, more often, just to embarrass them, they were forced to drink specially prepared wine mixed with so-called aphrodisiac herbs and eat stimulating foods like honey cakes or oysters, all under constant jeering from onlookers. The priest would then consecrate the bed itself, sprinkling holy water on the sheets where the act was to take place. Special prayers were recited, asking for quick conception from the woman and successful performance from the man. Curtains were drawn around the bed, but they were often thin enough to show silhouettes. Witnesses would place themselves around the room, some near the bed to hear noises, others by the door to make sure no one left early. These royal examples are among the most documented and the most harrowing. When Catherine of Aragon married Prince Arthur in 5001, 6 elite nobles were designated to witness the act. The Spanish ambassador insisted on staying close to ensure the political deal between England and Spain was physically sealed. When Arthur exited the room the next morning, he boasted that he had been in Spain and demanded ale, claiming that marriage is thirsty work. Whether he actually consummated the union would become a major political debate decades later during Henry VII's annulment case. Louis V's 6th and Marionette's wedding night in 1770 was even more humiliating. The Archbishop of Reims and numerous French dignitaries were present as the teenage couple struggled with their first sexual experience. Court records suggest it took 7 years for them to successfully consummate the marriage. 7 years of repeated, publicly pressured attempts, many with witnesses in attendance. The psychological toll of that kind of pressure is hard to imagine. When Margaret Tudor married the King of Scotland at the age of 13, Scottish nobility demanded to witness the act themselves to ensure the English princess had truly been claimed for Scotland. Some records note, hearing her distress, whether it was from pain, fear, or the horror of such a public moment, no one can say for sure. Political marriages weren't about romance. They were about strategy, cementing alliances, securing borders, and ensuring heirs. And all of that hinged on whether a couple could prove physical union. The next morning brought even more humiliation. Sheets were displayed as public evidence, either hung from windows or paraded through castle halls. The bride might be examined by midwives who searched for physical signs that consummation had occurred. These women would then swear legal oaths about their findings. Their statements became part of permanent records still preserved in archives today. Witnesses gave formal testimonies describing what they had seen or heard. Several accounts mention bed curtain movement consistent with vigorous activity and auditory confirmation as strong evidence. In some cases, witnesses had to remain overnight to observe multiple attempts. If a couple failed to prove success, they were sometimes forced to repeat the performance the following night. This time with even more people present. Continued failure could lead to annulment almost immediately. The consequences enormous. Failed consummation could collapse political treaties, trigger succession crises, or lead to national conflicts. Dowries could be revoked. Entire dynasties could be thrown into chaos. The pressure on 2 young, inexperienced people to perform a deeply personal act under the watch of strangers was unbearable. And here's what most people miss. This wasn't just cruel tradition. It was legally and politically necessary. Political marriages were the core of medieval diplomacy. They stopped wars, arranged trade, and determined inheritance. But if the marriage wasn't consummated, it didn't legally exist. In fact, inheritance laws demanded proof. A noble woman's virginity was seen as a form of currency. It had to be visibly transferred to ensure the legitimacy of heirs. The church made things even worse. Marriage was considered a sacred sacrament, but it only counted if it was physically completed. And theology was crystal clear on that. The concept of 2 becoming one flesh wasn't just symbolic. It demanded physical proof. Witnesses were required to eliminate any future debates over legitimacy. A king had to be certain that his heir was truly his. Noble families needed assurance that their daughters had been properly claimed before releasing their dowries. Fertility among the elite wasn't a private concern, it was a matter of national interest. The entire social hierarchy hinged on producing legitimate heirs. Witnesses didn't just offer gossip. They could prevent wars over succession. The exact customs varied across Europe. French weddings often featured more direct observation. English traditions leaned toward verifying the morning after. In some Italian ceremonies, the entire wedding party might flood into the chamber to witness the event. Suddenly, today's cringy wedding speeches feel like a dream in comparison. These days, the most embarrassing part of a wedding might be a slur toast from a tipsy uncle. We've tucked intimacy so far into the private realm that even alluding to it during a wedding feels inappropriate. The notion of having witnesses to consummation seems absurd to modern minds, like something out of a satirical novel. But the disturbing truth is this: what we now consider privacy is a modern luxury. It didn't truly emerge until after the 1700s. For most of human history, intimacy was a matter of public concern shaped by economics, politics, and social norms, and it required verification. And, speaking of the church's influence on personal affairs, gets even stranger. You're about to hear about bishops who didn't just preach chastity, they ran the very businesses they condemned. Here's where medieval life reaches peak contradiction. The same bishops who thundered about purity from the pulpit were running massive entertainment empires. Take the Bishop of Winchester, for example. He wasn't just turning a blind eye to adult services, he managed the largest entertainment network in medieval England. In Suk, across the Thames from London, 18 establishments operated under his authority, staffed by over 1,000 women, known as the Winchester Geese. These weren't bacchanalians. They had public signage, printed price lists, and even the bishop's coat of arms proudly displayed above their doors, and the revenue. It funded Winchester Cathedral. Every chanted psalm, every carved stone paid for by the church's share of the entertainment trade. The hypocrisy is jaw-dropping, but this wasn't some amateur operation. It was a sophisticated, well-regulated business. These establishments were located in the Liberty of the Clink, an area under the bishop's exclusive legal control. The architecture was distinctive. Large, front-facing windows where women would be displayed to passers-by. The most infamous location, the Bow's Head, could accommodate over 100 visitors a night. Another venue, the Cardinal's Hat, catered to higher-paying customers, charging premium rates for women who were medically certified as disease-free by the bishop's own physicians. Records from these businesses still exist in church archives. Weekly ledgers documented profits of 20 to 40 per house, the modern equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars. The church's licensing process was bureaucratic and thorough. Women needed annual work permits with fees attached, of course. Weekly sin taxes were paid directly into church funds. Working during Lent was technically banned, but those with extra cash could pay fines to ignore it. The recruitment process was even more unsettling. Every year, the Goose Fair functioned under the pretense of hiring domestic servants, but its real purpose was known to all. Young women from rural villages would come seeking honest work, only to discover that the best-paying roles were in the bishop's brothel. Church officials would screen applicants for beauty and health, assigning the best women to the highest-class houses. This model, pioneered by the Bishop of Winchester, was adopted across Europe. In every transaction, the church took its cut, often 30 to 40% of the gross revenue. Physicians employed by the church performed weekly health inspections, checking for disease. Those who passed were awarded certification to continue working. Those who failed were suspended unless they paid bribes to continue. Even protection services were monetized. Church guards patrolled these districts, defending the women from abuse for a fee. They also acted as debt collectors, ensuring customers paid what they owed. Some women were even allowed to buy into retirement plans, essentially early insurance policies to support them when they could no longer work. Tragically, most didn't live long enough to benefit from them. In Avignon, the papal entertainment district operated directly under the Vatican during the Avignon papacy. The Pope's treasurers collected taxes that helped fund papal military forces. The building still stands with a papal coat of arms carved in stone above its entrance. Church records show it employed over 200 women at its peak, with private rooms reserved for travelling clergy. German bishops developed entire networks of such operations across the Holy Roman Empire. The Archbishop of Mainz ran establishments in 6 different cities. The Bishop of Strasbourg owned 4, all within view of the cathedral spire. These weren't secret dens of vice, they were public businesses. They advertised openly, competed for customers, and sent tax revenues directly into the bishop's treasury. In Spain, the arrangement was even more integrated. Some cathedral complexes literally contained these operations. In Seville, the adult venue was attached to the church via underground tunnels, allowing priests to visit in secret. Women employed there were made to attend special masses, sitting in marked pews as they were preached at for the very sins they were expected to commit. Later that evening, several church councils tried to stop this, but the money was too good. At the Council of Constance in 1414, a motion was raised to ban clerical ownership of entertainment houses. It failed. Why? Because many of the attending bishops had arrived with entourages of women from the very industry they were supposed to condemn. The Council of Basel in 1431 issued a fiery denunciation of church involvement in adult entertainment. Ironically, the documents condemning the practice were written in rooms above the largest brothel in town, owned by the local bishop. So, how did they justify it? The answer lies in the twisted logic of medieval theology. Church fathers leaned on Saint Deus on the saint. Augustine's old claim that such activities were a necessary evil, like a sewer, disgusting but essential to keep the city clean. Thomas Aquinas went further, arguing that regulated services reduced worse sins like rape, adultery, or violence. By controlling the vice, bishops claimed they were defending public virtue. But the real reason was far more straightforward. Money. Building cathedrals was expensive. Financing wars required endless gold. Bishops lived like nobility, and the church needed cash flow. And nothing filled the coffers like a business that never stopped, even on holy days. Some historians estimate that revenues from entertainment operations made up between 20 and 30% of the church's income in many major cities. The Bishop of Winchester's enterprise alone generated enough annual profit to fund the construction of a new church every year. The profit margins were astounding. A standard transaction might cost the client 4p. 1 went to the woman, 1 covered operating costs, and the remaining 2p flowed directly into church funds. Multiply that by thousands of weekly transactions across hundreds of church-controlled venues, and it becomes clear why reform was never a serious option. The medieval church was financially dependent on these operations. What's shocking to modern sensibilities is that at the time this arrangement wasn't considered particularly outrageous. The clear boundary between religious authority and commercial enterprise that we expect today simply didn't exist. Bishops weren't just spiritual leaders, they were landlords, tax enforcers, and businessmen. Running brothel was just another source of revenue, no more morally jarring to them than collecting fees at a toll gate or charging for mill usage. The same bishop who thundered against vice in Sunday sermons might review his brothel's earnings the next day and feel no internal contradiction, and beyond profit, there was a layer of social control. By managing these operations, the church wasn't just collecting money, it was shaping society. They controlled who could work, where and when services could be offered, and how much could be charged. They created moral categories, distinguishing honest workers from the disreputable. They enforced strict dress codes to visibly separate these women from the so-called respectable. In this way, brothel became mechanisms of social engineering, directing male urges into monitored, taxable environments. In comparison, today's religious scandals seem tame. Modern clergy caught in compromising situations typically try to cover it up. Medieval bishops, they hung their coat of arms over the door and ran the business proudly. It wasn't hidden hypocrisy, it was systematic, institutionalized at the highest echelons of spiritual power, and the contradictions ran even deeper, right into medicine and theology. The church didn't just tolerate these practices. Its affiliated physicians prescribed sexual satisfaction as medical treatment. In fact, medieval medical authorities believed that female orgasm was essential for conception. This wasn't fringe science. It was mainstream doctrine taught in universities and printed in standard medical texts. According to the widely accepted two-seed theory, both partners needed to contribute bodily fluids for conception to occur. A woman, it was believed, could only release her seed during orgasm. If she didn't climax, she couldn't get pregnant. Therefore, husbands were expected medically to learn how to please their wives. Doctors and midwives taught detailed techniques. Some even provided physical demonstrations to couples. It's hard to imagine today, but medieval physicians were offering sex therapy centuries before modern anatomy was properly understood. These theories came primarily from the Greek physician Galen, whose ideas dominated European medicine for over a millennium. Galen taught that women had internal genitalia analogous to male organs, and that orgasm triggered the release of their reproductive fluid just as it did for men. Medieval physicians elaborated on this, developing complex theories around female sexual response. Women with hot temperaments supposedly required different techniques than those with cold ones. Moist or dry body humors influenced ideal positions for intimacy. It sounds as detailed as any modern relationship guide, but it was based entirely on misinformation. Still, medical texts from the era were astonishingly specific. The most influential was the Trotula, a collection of women's medical knowledge that described in explicit detail how to help a woman achieve satisfaction. It advised using sweet-smelling oils, gentle touch in sensitive areas, and optimal positions based on constitution. Cold-natured women were advised to be on top, tilted anatomy called for sidelining positions, and overly moist women were given yet other suggestions. The clinical specificity is astonishing. For a time, many assumed knew nothing about female pleasure. Physicians even developed tools and methods that would make today's therapists blush. Some recommended specially carved warming devices made from wood or ivory. Herbal oils containing mint or pennyroyal were used to heighten sensation. Cinnamon or pepper oil was applied to stimulate blood flow. Some doctors suggested music, arguing that rhythmic melodies enhanced arousal. This gave rise to a strange medical subspecialty. Midwives became de facto intimacy coaches. They gave lessons, demonstrated techniques using Croft dolls, and even hosted guided sessions where they gave life feedback to couples, offering instruction on rhythm, touch, and posture. An entire industry grew around female arousal aids. Wealthy women purchased expensive treatments, pearls crushed in wine, exotic powders mixed with honey, tinctures of mandrake root. Intricately carved jade tools were sold as exercises. Some enhancements were studied with jewels or filled with stimulating herbs, while primitive irrigation devices were used for pre-intimacy cleansing. All of it was endorsed by the medical establishment, not as hedonism, but as vital for reproductive success. Medical case studies illustrate how seriously this was taken. One physician recorded treating a merchant's wife who had been unable to conceive after 3 years. His prescription: daily intimate massage using heated oils, a diet rich in warming spices like ginger and cinnamon, and special instructions for her husband on how to provide satisfaction. After 2 months, she became pregnant. The climax was credited for the success. Doctors also designed tools for diagnosis and treatment. They used crude instruments to inspect internal anatomy, though their understanding was flawed. Some developed tests using feathers or warmed probes to check sensitivity. Others invented devices to amplify sound, supposedly indicating arousal when placed near the body. In this way, the female orgasm became medicalized, not for its own sake, but as a necessary ingredient for healthy conception, and this created theological chaos. Pleasure was considered sinful unless it was necessary for procreation. Confessors had to walk an impossible line. If a woman enjoyed herself too much, she was guilty of lust. But if she failed to enjoy intimacy, she might fail to conceive, which was also a sin. Theological debates broke out over whether pleasure during conception tainted the soul of the child. Some argued that lustful conception bred immoral offspring. Others claimed that children conceived without joy were spiritually defective. It was a lose-lose situation. Confession manuals revealed just how trapped women were. They were told to confess if they enjoyed sex, but also if they didn't reach climax. One guide even instructed priests to ask women whether they experienced the physical release necessary for conception. Those who admitted to faking pleasure to escape unwanted encounters were told they had interfered with God's plan for fertility. The gap between religious doctrine and medical guidance led to a covert network of intimate knowledge. Midwives privately taught techniques that priests condemned from the pulpit. Medical texts were copied and passed around in convents where nuns often provided reproductive care. Women exchanged fertility advice that, in truth, functioned as disguised satisfaction methods. Official culture denounced female pleasure, yet the medical community made it essential. Here's what most people don't realize. Medieval medicine wasn't just philosophical guesswork. It was built on generations of observation. The framework was flawed based on humoral theory rather than hormones, but the empirical insights were real. Practitioners noticed patterns linking satisfaction and fertility. Economic pressures, especially the need for heirs, drove this attention. Noble bloodlines depended on legitimate offspring. Merchants needed successes for their trade, and even farming families required children for labor. Infertility meant financial ruin. So when prevailing theory claimed female climax was necessary for conception, satisfying women became a medical obligation, or even if it clashed with theology. The gender divide in medicine also mattered. Men wrote the textbooks, but women provided care. Female healers passed down knowledge of women's anatomy in response, translating it into acceptable medical language. Teaching a woman how to climax was sinful. Offering treatments to warm the womb was medical care. Ironically, this made medieval doctors more forward-thinking than some 20th century physicians. In the Victorian era, doctors denied that respectable women had desire at all. Early modern medicine labelled female sexual pleasure as pathological. By contrast, medieval physicians, though misguided in their theories, at least treated female pleasure as biologically important. They justified it with humoral balance and theological logic, but the result was the same. Women had medical permission to seek pleasure. This had significant social consequences. Unlike later centuries that erased female desire, medieval women could demand satisfaction with medical backing. Legal records even show women citing lack of pleasure as grounds for annulment. Texts advised husbands that failing to satisfy their wives was a failure of marital duty. While the two-seed theory was scientifically incorrect, it gave women more intimate agency than they would see for hundreds of years. That said, if the prescriptions for pleasure seem oddly modern, wait until you hear what medieval women did to prevent pregnancy. Contraception methods from the period make you truly thankful for modern healthcare. Each attempt at prevention was a gamble, often with fatal stakes. The ingredient lists read like toxic experiments, dangerous plants, animal byproducts, heavy metals, and organic materials. These weren't mere superstitions. Many came from academic medical texts written by trained physicians. Women inserted deadly pessaries before sex, some containing mercury or lead. Others drank concoctions with poisonous ingredients that risked organ failure or permanent nerve damage. Preventing pregnancy often meant risking death. But for many, the dangers of childbirth or another mouth to feed were worse. Even barrier methods, though more creative, were riddled with danger. Crocodile dung wasn't chosen randomly. It had an alkaline quality that could affect fertility. Ancient Egyptian texts dating back to 1850 BCE recommended it, and medieval European doctors copying older knowledge without understanding replicated the advice. But access to crocodile waste was limited, so women substituted whatever animal feces they had, horse, cow or pig, which introduced dangerous bacteria. Somewhat safer were honey and acacia gum mixtures. Acacia ferments into a mild acid, while honey has antibacterial properties. Women soaked wool or cotton in the mix and used it as a primitive barrier. Unfortunately, the lack of hygiene and the risk of forgotten material led to infections and, in some cases, death from toxic shock. Sea sponges soaked in acidic liquids, vinegar, lemon juice or wine were among the more sophisticated options. The acidity could act as a spermicide, while the sponge provided physical blockage. Mediterranean women had natural access to sea sponges, but in the north, women used moss, rags, or even bread. The method required precise timing and removal, and infections remained a major threat. Animal organ sheath came closest to modern contraceptives. Cleaned and dried sheep intestines, pig bladders, and fish bladders were fashioned into early condoms. They were expensive, reusable, and mostly accessible to the wealthy. They were tied with ribbon and had to be soaked in warm milk or water before use. The Catholic Church fiercely opposed them, calling them armor against God's will. Using one could lead to excommunication. The sheer toxicity of some methods speaks to the desperation of women facing unwanted pregnancy. Mercury mixtures were prescribed in small doses to cool the womb. These caused tremors, tooth loss, and in many cases, madness. Some women were poisoned to death, a tragic but effective form of birth control. Lead-based treatments were just as horrific. Sweet salt, a lead compound, was consumed or applied internally. It caused severe pain, constipation, and irreversible brain damage. Analyses of medieval female skeletons have revealed dangerously high lead levels, suggesting death by contraceptive use. Copper sulfate, introduced through Arab medical knowledge, was used for post-intercourse irrigation. While copper can be effective, the concentrations used were caustic, leading to burns, infections, and permanent internal damage. Herbal options were less lethal, but still dangerous. Pennyroyal tea could prevent implantation, but was toxic to the liver. Rue, Queen Anne's lace, and tansy were common, but had an incredibly narrow margin between effectiveness and poison. A woman might choose 7 Queen Anne's lace seeds daily or drink RT during menstruation, but dosing errors were often fatal. Then there were the magical methods, seemingly absurd but deadly serious to those who tried them. Women wore charms made from weasel reproductive organs around their thighs during intercourse. These had to be harvested under specific moon phases and preserved in honey. Others applied mule earwax internally, believing that because mules are sterile, the wax had contraceptive power. One of the most chilling practices involved carrying the preserved hands of deceased infants, ideally unbaptized, as amulets during intercourse, believing the spiritual power would prevent conception. The black market for infant corpses used in contraceptive magic appears in records from several witch trials. Menstrual blood rituals, meanwhile, straddled the line between proto-science and occult practice. Some women would dry their menstrual blood into powder and secretly feed it to their husbands in wine or food, believing it would reduce male sexual drive. Others burned used menstrual cloths and used the ashes as vaginal pessaries. Still others believed that sex during menstruation prevented future pregnancy, a practice the church condemned as especially sinful. More extreme methods involved exotic animal organs. These suppositories often required freshly harvested organs from black cats killed under specific astrological alignments. Dried, ground, and blended with herbs, they were formed into piesaries. Because of the association between cats and witchcraft, mere possession of such items could lead to accusations of sorcery. Yet archaeological digs around convents and other institutions have uncovered an unusual density of cat bones in latrines, suggesting this practice was more common than we might think. The desperation behind these dangerous choices was rooted in harsh realities. Repeated pregnancies wrecked women's bodies. A woman who lived to menopause often experienced 8 to 12 pregnancies. Childbirth was the leading cause of death for women of childbearing age. Poor families couldn't afford to feed more children, but the church condemned any interference with procreation as sinful. Husbands had legal rights to sexual access, women had no legal way to refuse and little recourse. Still, a female knowledge economy persisted in secret. Midwives passed on contraceptive recipes to apprentices. Wise women sold herbs and gave instructions. Even sex workers exchanged professional tricks. Ironically, convents became hubs of reproductive knowledge. Nuns tasked with caring for women's health had to know what methods desperate women were attempting. This underground network thrived despite harsh religious and legal restrictions. Much of the contraceptive burden fell on women because men often refused to practice withdrawal, one of the few risk-free methods available. Though also condemned by the church, withdrawal at least didn't involve poison, yet court records show women begging husbands to spill seed outside and being beaten for the request. This gendered imbalance in reproductive responsibility hasn't changed as much as we might like to think. Midwife networks developed complex supply chains for these methods. They sourced rare ingredients from distant regions, gathered specific herbs in season, and maintained generations-old recipes that balanced effectiveness with survivability. Tragically, midwives were often prosecuted as witches precisely because of their contraceptive knowledge. To know how to prevent life, authorities believed was to be capable of ending it. In this light, today's safe, legal, and effective birth control feels like a miracle. For most of history, family planning was a life-threatening act. Every attempt at contraception was a gamble with death. That women survived long enough to pass on this knowledge is a testament to both desperation and resilience. And if contraception was dangerous, medieval love magic was outright macabre. Forget flowers and love letters. Medieval romance involved corpse parts, menstrual blood, and the bone marrow of dead children. In 1320, Beatrix d'Anisole stood trial in France for secretly mixing her menstrual blood into her lover's wine. She wasn't an outlier. She was following a recipe found in grimoires passed from woman to woman. The ingredients in these potions sound like props from a horror film. Ground bones of unbaptized infants, organs from executed criminals, bodily fluids collected after sex, powdered dove brains, and even fragments of human heart. These were not metaphors or symbols. These were literal materials. Women bribed executioners, robbed graves, and hoarded their bodily secretions, all in pursuit of love and control. Human components had specific sourcing rules. Infant bone marrow was believed most potent, especially from children who died unbaptized. The marrow had to be extracted within 3 days of burial, using heated needles, then dried and ground before mixing with honey and wine. The resulting potion would be administered to a target gradually over weeks. Collecting menstrual blood took planning and discretion. Women stored their flow in dedicated ceramic containers, often marked with mystical symbols. Blood might be dried into cakes or used fresh, depending on the recipe. Some call for blood from specific cycle days or lunar phases. The most powerful formulas required mixing menstrual blood with other bodily fluids gathered after intimacy. Supposedly, merging the essences of both partners. Hair was another essential. Women collected strands from their lovers, sometimes during sex, sometimes afterward, and either stored them in lockets or stitched them into garments. Later, the hair might be burned with incense, ground into powder, or braided into charms. Some recipes called for hair from both partners, interwoven and worn close to the skin. Others required stealing hair without the man's knowledge, adding deception to the act of love. Corpse organs required even more precision. The person had to die violently. Executed criminals were ideal with suicide victims, a secondary choice. The organs were dried slowly over low heat, then combined with herbs like vein or mandre and mixed into food. The belief was that the violent death imbued the organ with magnetic power. Some executioners built side hustles selling preserved organs to desperate women. The rituals were as elaborate as the ingredients were disturbing. Women timed cemetery visits based on the moon, new moons for binding, full moons for attraction. Incantations were recited, often in Latin phrases, memorized phonetically without understanding. Mixing took place at crossroads, graveyards, or churchyards. Others called for wearing the target's clothing. Timing was everything. Grimoire texts included detailed lunar calendars and astrological charts. Gathering an ingredient under the wrong moon rendered it useless or dangerous. The incantations themselves were often a bizarre mix of Latin folk sayings and nonsense syllables. A 14th century grimoire includes this example: Bervis visa mortui banguin menstrum lea cormantis. Many women couldn't read, so they memorized the lines by sound, often garbling them. Still, the power was believed to lie in the ritual, not the pronunciation. Amazingly, some potion recipes show surprising sophistication in their dosage instructions. Grimoires gave exact instructions on how much love potion to use, factoring in a target size, temperament, and resistance. Too little and the spell failed. Too much and the man could go mad or die. Women recorded outcomes carefully, adjusting recipes based on effects. Some became known as love magic specialists, offering their services to others. The legal consequences were severe, but inconsistently applied. The church labeled love magic witchcraft punishable by excommunication or death. Secular courts treated it as poisoning if the victim fell ill, but outcomes and class-shaped enforcement. Noble women might be sentenced to penance, poor women could be executed. Court cases show how common the practice was in Montu. Several women were tried for love magic between 3008 and 1325. Their testimony includes recipes and ritual instructions. In 1480, Venetian authorities uncovered a widespread potion-selling network with standardized pricing and ingredients. London court records mention dozens of love magic cases each year throughout the medieval period. Punishments varied wildly. If a potion succeeded in making the target fall in love, the woman might receive leniency. If the man became ill or died, she could be hanged. Nobles might commute death sentences to exile or imprisonment in a convent. Poor women had no such options. One of the most memorable punishments came from Augsburg. Convicted potion makers were forced to publicly drink their own brews. Grimoires often exaggerated success rates, but court testimony suggests some psychological effects. Men who knew they'd been dosed often claimed to feel unnatural attraction. The placebo effect, power of suggestion, or noibo anxiety caused real behavioral changes. In many cases, the target may have already been interested. The potion merely gave the woman confidence to act. Victim reports describe strange symptoms: racing hearts, lack of focus, intrusive arousal. Whether due to actual ingredients, psychological suggestion, or fear of magic, the effects were very real. The women risking everything for these results were often responding to the brutal reality of medieval life. Marriage was a woman's best, sometimes only, path to security. An unmarried woman passed her prime faced poverty or social exile. Widow remarriage was often the only route to survival. In this context, Grave robbing for potion ingredients wasn't madness, it was strategy. A marriage to a merchant or lesser noble could transform not just a woman's life, but her family's entire future. Marrying a skilled artisan instead of a labourer could mean the difference between comfort and starvation. Love potions weren't about romance, they were high-stakes economic investments. Medieval love magic drew heavily from classical sources. Ovid's Art of Love and Greek magical papyri were copied and reinterpreted in medieval grimoires. Classical authority gave the practice a kind of intellectual legitimacy. If ancient poets described love potions, how sinful could they really be? There was also overlap between love magic and folk medicine. Many ingredients had legitimate uses. Dove's blood treated epilepsy. Human bone marrow was a remedy for joint pain. This gave women plausible deniability. Apothecaries selling dove brains for headaches had no idea they were destined for spells. It also made ingredient acquisition easier. Medical needs provided a cover. Gender shaped the way magic was treated. Both men and women used love magic, but prosecutions overwhelmingly targeted women. Male practitioners were often respected as learned magicians. Women, in contrast, were labelled witches. A woman using magic to control a man was seen as subversive. It flipped the natural social order. Church attitudes were complex. Officially, all magic was condemned. But in practice, some clergy offered love blessings and charms. Priests sold holy water and blessed candles explicitly for love rituals. Certain monasteries even gained reputations for effective magical help. The church focused less on love magic itself than on its perceived diabolical components. All of this makes modern dating look positively tame. Today's romance may be confusing, but at least it doesn't involve powdered bones and grave dirt. Love spells have been replaced with dating apps, pickup lines, and filtered selfies. At worst, we get ghosted. In the Middle Ages, you could literally be poisoned in the name of love. Still, if potion making was dangerous, public punishment for adultery was worse. Think social media shaming is bad. In medieval France, adulterers endured la course. If caught, a couple would be paraded naked through town. A leather rope was tied around the man's waist, and the woman had to lead him like an animal. This wasn't spontaneous mob justice. It was organised, ceremonial, and brutal. Town criers announced the offence and named the guilty. Church bells rang at dawn. The couple was brought to the square and stripped under official supervision. Spectators arrived with rotten vegetables, whips, even chamber pots full of waste. The route wound through the busiest parts of town, past the church, the market, the town well, and local taverns. At each major stop, designated citizens, usually strong, respected men, delivered blows. Some neighbourhoods had punishment stations where the humiliation intensified. The full course might take hours to complete, covering 2 to 3 miles. The event was a civic ritual. Shops closed, fields were abandoned, the entire town turned out. Medieval cancel culture didn't just ruin reputations, it broke skin. Children were brought to witness the wages of sin. Townspeople prepared for days, stockpiling rotten vegetables, collecting animal waste, crafting special whips. Anticipation built like a festival. Vendors sold snacks and drinks. Drummers sometimes provided a grim soundtrack to the spectacle. Church bells rang throughout, giving religious gravity to the punishment. Different bell patterns marked the event stages. Rapid ringing at the start, slow tolling at punishment stations, triumphant peals at the end. Some towns even had bells reserved just for adultery runs. The judicial records from Carsonnon in 1347 paint a disturbing picture. A merchant's wife caught with a young clerk endured loss that July. She dragged him 3 miles, suffering beatings from willow switches and filth hurled by the crowd. She survived, but fled town immediately. The rope around his waist caused internal injuries, and he died a week later from infection. Toulouse records from 38-9 describe a knight caught with a baker's wife. Despite his noble status, he was not spared the ritual. The symbolism of a common woman leading a knight by a rope enraged the crowd. They saw a rare chance to punish aristocratic privilege. He survived, but the damage ended his military career. He could no longer ride. For a punishment that wasn't technically an execution, survival rates were low. Up to 40% of men died from infection or internal damage caused by the waist binding. Women fared better, but still suffered serious injuries from beatings and public violence. Some couples killed themselves rather than face la cour. Others vanished, living in permanent exile once rumors spread. The crowd's behavior revealed deep community dynamics. The harshest blows often came from the wronged spouse's relatives. But the event also invited personal revenge. Spurned lovers, business rivals, even envious neighbours could join in under a cloak of moral justice. What was punishment for adultery became a cathartic purge of community tensions. The ideology behind Laor saw sin as collective contamination. Adultery wasn't just betrayal, it was a threat to the economic and social fabric. It cast doubt on paternity, inheritance, and family alliances. The whole community had to cleanse the sin through ritualized violence. Every whip crack, every thrown vegetable was part of restoring order. The gender symbolism was harsh and revealing. The woman leading the rope signified a sexual reversal of power, female control over male desire. The man being led showed how lust reduced men to animals, but women still paid a steeper price. Most were expelled after the ritual, regardless of survival. Men, especially of status, were sometimes allowed to stay. Adultery in a world where wealth and bloodlines were inseparable wasn't just a private matter. It was theft of lineage, of property, of social trust. The public nature of the punishment was designed to reinforce moral contracts. Everyone saw what happened when marriage vows were broken. Different regions had different styles of punishment. In England, adulterers were more likely to face the stocks or pillories. German towns favoured head shaving or tar, but southern France and parts of Italy fixated on rope-pulled punishments. Some historians link this to Roman traditions emphasising humiliation over incarceration. As a deterrent, laws had mixed results. Court records show adultery rates didn't decline significantly, but deterrence may not have been the main point. The ritual served other purposes: communal bonding through shared violence, the release of pent-up social frustrations, reinforcement of gender and marriage norms. Its endurance suggests it met deep emotional and cultural needs. Gradually, the violence lessened. By the 1500s, many towns replaced la course with symbolic processions. Adulterers might be paraded on a donkey facing backward or forced to wear signs detailing their sins. The rope binding vanished first. Too many deaths had caused legal backlash, but public shaming persisted. Even into the modern era, social punishment for adultery remained common, just with less blood. By comparison, today's cancel culture seems downright gentle. Online shaming can destroy reputations and careers, but it doesn't involve actual rope burns or public beatings. We've swapped whips for hashtags, chamber pots for angry tweets, but the primal urge to punish in public still lingers. It just moved to the digital square after watching 7 layers of medieval sexual madness unfold. From courtroom performance trials to grave robbing for love potions, modern life, i.e., for all its frustrations, is a paradise by comparison. We've seen judges inspecting men for sexual fitness to marry. We've seen noble families crowd into wedding bedrooms to witness consummation. We've met bishops profiting from entertainment empires while preaching chastity. We've watched doctors prescribe orgasm while priests condemned it. We've followed women risking death with mercury and exotic animals to avoid pregnancy. We've uncovered dead infant bones crushed into love charms. We've witnessed adultery punished with rope leashes and townspeople armed with waste and vengeance. The ultimate lesson. Medieval people weren't repressed, they were obsessed. They made intimacy a public matter in ways that would shock even the most invasive modern tabloids. Where we swipe left or get ghosted, they used rope, fire, bone, and blood. Your intimate performance could be examined in court. Your wedding night might require official witnesses. The bishop who condemned your desires could own the brothel you visited. Your doctor prescribed satisfaction. Your priest condemned it. Every aspect of intimacy we considered deeply private was once public record, witnessed, documented, judged. Privacy, as we understand it, simply didn't exist. The idea that what happens in your bedroom is nobody else's business. To medieval people, that would have sounded insane because intimacy mattered. Economically, invalid marriages disrupted inheritances. Politically, unconsummated royal weddings caused wars. Socially, adultery polluted whole communities. Medically, satisfaction was required for conception. Religiously, every act was subject to divine judgment. In this world, intimacy wasn't just personal. It was public property, and something so powerful could never be left to private discretion. Here, what followed is one of the most profound transformations in human history. We move from public capability exams to confidential doctor visits, from witnessed consummations to private honeymoon suites, from bishops running entertainment empires to adult industries driven underground and criminalized. From prescribed satisfaction to repressed desire, from deadly contraceptives to safe birth control, from corks-based love potions to dating apps, from rope-leashed adultery punishment to subtweets and Instagram call-outs. But medieval practices reveal something constant: the hunger for satisfaction, the yearning for romantic connection, the urge to control fertility, the instinct to punish transgressions. The methods changed, the impulses never did. They weren't so different from us. They just lived in a world where privacy hadn't been invented, where your body could be public evidence, where shame was communal, where social control was absolute. Because to regulate intimacy, they made it visible. We've traded communal humiliation for private anxiety. No more courtroom capability exams. Now we get performance pressure. No witness consummation, just wedding night dread. No rope-tied punishments, just relationship implosions behind closed doors. But surveillance didn't die, it just changed form. They had bishops and court scribes. We have dating apps and digital footprints. They accepted intimate surveillance because they had no other option. We're opting into it one overshare at a time. In some ways, we're circling back to a world where intimacy is everyone's business. Only now it's not on church steps, it's on your phone screen. So the next time you feel awkward on a date, remember the alternative involved grave robing for love potion ingredients. When modern contraception seems inconvenient, at least it doesn't require powdered weasel testicles. If you suffer performance anxiety, be glad it isn't transcribed by a courtroom clear. And if your wedding feels stressful, at least your in-laws aren't watching the consummation. Today, we enjoy what medieval people couldn't dream of: privacy in intimate matters, safe, legal birth control, doctors who don't diagnose you based on wandering wombs, consensual relationships without economic coercion, a right to say no. These aren't ancient rights, they're modern miracles, hard-fought, fragile, and recent. The medieval world shows us a nightmare: intimacy without privacy. But it also reminds us that the struggles, the desires, the fears were always human. We've always wanted love, satisfaction, autonomy. We've always battled shame, judgment, pressure. Only the punishments were different and more public. So, subscribe for more disturbing truths your history teacher skipped. Comment your most shocking revelation. Capability exams, bishop-run brothel. If you're grateful your romantic life isn't documented in court records, because no matter how awkward things get, at least you're not being paraded through the streets naked by a rope around your waist while neighbours throw waste.